So, hope you're doing well. My name is Iqbal Chaudhary. I'm a PhD student in mechanical engineering at Hopkins and the director of education in the Graduate Consulting Club. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here and welcome to the second installment of Fireside Management Chat. This is going to be a lecture series, as I said previously. Some of you were here, where every other Friday I sit with a host, I sit with a guest and do this at noon. And the idea is to find answers to some of the burning questions regarding consulting or management consulting companies. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Nick Edwards. So Nick, thanks a lot for joining us. Nick is a neuroscientist with diverse interest. He has, if I say, several irons in the fire. So he's the host of Once a Scientist podcast, where he interviews scientists about their careers in academia and beyond. The podcast has a section called Consulting 101, and I loved it. It has 5 fantastic episodes. I strongly recommend all of you to check it out. Nick is a neuroscientist, as I said, by training. He did his PhD um, and postdoctoral training at Brown University, NIH, and UC San Diego. And after that, he decided to join Boston Consulting Group as a business strategy person in San Diego, and later came back to San Diego to work for Illumina. So now he's working for a biotech company called Resilience. So yeah, over to you, Nick. Thanks a lot for joining, and we hope we learned something very exciting and cool from you about consulting and management.
All right. Well, I hope so too. Um, but you never know. So, good to be here, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. And if you do want to check out that Consulting 101 series, I have a website. It's called onceascientist.net. It's like once a scientist, always a scientist, and it's .net because I couldn't get .com. Um, so it's great to meet all of you and excited to talk to you about my path. Let me actually share my screen. Oh, sorry. It says that we've disabled screen sharing for the talk. I'm happy to just kind of talk through it if that's you're on mute, Iqbal.
Let me enable screen sharing.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's all right. No worries. So yeah, I'll just as a quick introduction, I have yeah, I do have a lot of interests and
Can you try sharing once again, please?
yeah, let me try it. There we go.
All right.
Looks like it's working. Okay. All right. So I imagine you can see my screen. Okay. So there we go. Is that working?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, as Iqbal mentioned, I have a background in a number of different things and have worked in consulting. I'm no longer doing that for various reasons, but it was a great opportunity. Really enjoyed it. And it was a really awesome transition point for me and for my career. And so happy to talk about that, answer any questions. Iqbal, if it's okay with you, I'm fine if you guys just want to jump in and ask questions as we go along. Feel free. You can do it in the chat bar, or you can just like jump into the conversation and interrupt me because like
Yes, it is totally fine to jump in, unmute yourself, and jump in with a question. And let's try to make it as interactive as possible.
yeah, that sounds good to me. So um, yeah, as you can see, I have surfboards behind me, and this is just my garage. I live in San Diego and have been here for a couple of years. Been back and forth though. I've lived all over the country, and I did my PhD actually in Baltimore. So I'm very familiar with the area. I lived just one block north of Patterson Park. So yeah, I love Baltimore. Hopkins is such an amazing place, and so really excited for each of you, and figuring out what your next career path career step is, because it's kind of scary and kind of challenging. And let me just say that that's always the case. It doesn't matter whether you're going to stay in academia or whether you're going to go into a career in industry, or me a few years out after I've finished my PhD and my postdoc and done a bunch of different things. Like, career stuff is still, it's unnerving and unsettling, and it's kind of scary. And so that's one of the things that I really try and emphasize in the podcast, is that, you know, people that go into these various careers are just normal people. We have all gone through the same similar challenges that you may have gone through, and it's really important to recognize that, to me, because you know, behind every person that you think or see as successful, there's a story, and that's the idea of the podcast that I do at Once a Scientist, is to highlight those stories and to figure out, like, what are the challenges that people went through, because it's not a linear path always. So let me just give you a quick background about myself. So this is my timeline since when I started my PhD. So I had, if you can see my cursor here, in April 2011, I finished my undergraduate degree. And that same 3 days after that, I think, we had our first child. So my partner and I, we had a daughter at this point. And so throughout this entire PhD period, I had one child, and we had a second right here in the middle of 2015. And so by the time I graduated my PhD and went on to my postdoc, we had 2 kids. And it was challenging, to say the least. But I at the same time, I don't regret it. Not necessarily the point of my talk, but if you do have questions, you know, about those types of things, like managing work-life balance and you know, those types of, like, family related things, for example, you know, I'm happy to kind of talk about those as well. But so when I was in 2011, I started my PhD. It was at Brown University, and it was this joint program between Brown and the NIH. I did my PhD in neuroscience. It was at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is on the Bayview campus at Hopkins. And I did research on addiction and the very basic mechanisms of reward and addiction in the brain. And for these first, 1, 2, 3 years right here, I failed miserably in grad school. And I mean that, like, in all sincerity. I went through 3 different advisors. I had like 4 different projects, big projects, that just completely failed. And I didn't even get like interpretable results from them. And so 3 years into my PhD, I had an idea for a new project, and I was super excited about it. And I went into my PI, and I told him, I sent him an email, actually. I told him I have this idea, and he was all excited about it in the email. And then I go there, and I was being, and I had a co-advisor situation, and I was kind of ambushed by them. And he sat me down, and somehow, unbeknownst to me, they had talked behind the scenes, and he sat me down, and he said, Nick, you need to decide whether science is right for you. And this was 3 years into graduate school, and like, I was embarrassed. Like, I cried in front of him. and it was this point where I was like, am I even going to finish this stupid PhD? And I went home, and I had to really like think and kind of think introspectively and deeply. And I started looking at consulting as an option at that point, just like very cursory look. And but within like a week or 2, I decided, no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to do this. If somebody else can do it, I can figure it out. And so I came back to my PhD advisor, and I was like, look, I'm going to make this work. and I'm going to learn this new technique. It's called patch clamp electrophysiology. It's very technical and challenging to get good at. But I like just put my head down and dedicated a lot of effort to it. And within the next year and a half, I had finished my PhD. I had published a paper, and um, and kind of like revived my hopes of becoming a PI, a professor. And I was really excited about it. The paper I published was kind of a high impact paper, and so I decided, okay, I'm gonna figure out what I'm gonna do is, like, I've always been a surfer. Like, I grew up surfing, um, and I knew that I wanted to live near the ocean. And I also thought, like, maybe the biotech industry could be interesting. And so I kind of planned it so that I could have best of both worlds during my postdoc, and came to San Diego because they also had, one of the best neuroscience departments in the country. And so I came here for postdoc. Was Things actually like kicked off really well in the postdoc, and the project started going really well. I was getting a lot of traction, and but about a year in, I started just kind of like, well, the reality is I went surfing one day, and when I was out in the ocean, it was like a really, really good day. And I thought, you know, like, I love science, but I really love the ocean. and and like, it was therapeutic for me, and it's just something that has always been a big part of my life. And also, I wasn't seeing my family as much as I wanted to. Um, and and so at that point, I was out in the ocean that day, and I was like, I got to figure out a way to stick around here in San Diego. And and so then I was like, well, what am I going to do? So I went home, and I talked to my partner that morning, and I was like, hey, let's figure out how to stay here. And she was like, well, okay, but how are you going to afford that? And that's when my head started kind of spinning a little bit, and I was thinking, well, what could I do? I could work in the biotech industry here in San Diego. If I do that, like, what do I bring to the table? And the scientific skills set that I had gained was not entirely amenable to working in industry. And so I started thinking, well, what if I could come in from the business side? And then I, did some volunteering for an angel investing group in the area. I had worked at a couple startups when I was in college to pay my way through college. And so at that point, I started thinking, okay, if I get into biotech from the business side, then maybe that makes more sense. And then kind of just went through this process of, like, dive deep into. I went to what actually happened was I went to the one time I went to a consulting club meeting. They were doing a case competition with LEK, which is a pretty well-known life sciences consulting firm. And I volunteered at that point, and started kind of assessing this case of liquid biopsy, and which is a way to kind of measure or look at, biopsy somebody through a blood draw. And I thought it was really interesting. I like the strategy aspects of it, and that's what got me interested in strategy consulting. And then I just did a deep dive. Like, I didn't know, like, really anybody that was doing it. I didn't even know what it was, really. And then within the next 2 months, I had done a bunch of case interviews, and pushed really, really hard, and even gotten my PI's permission to take, like, a couple days off to really focus on case interviews, and was able to secure a job at BCG. So BCG was awesome. I can tell you guys more about it. But with all with the idea that I was going to come back to San Diego and work in the biotech industry. And so I worked there for about a year, a little bit over a year, and it was a great experience. amazing people. I think that many of these big consulting firms, they just do a good job of hiring smart people, but also like interesting and nice people for the most part. Not in every instance, but I think, yeah, for the most part, I just really liked the people there. I liked the work. It was very fast paced. The things that I liked about it, those are some of the things I liked about it. Some of the things I did not like about it personally was the fact that I had to travel 4 days a week and I was away from home. That's probably a little bit different right now, but may go back to it, after the pandemic is over. Um, and I knew that I wanted to utilize my scientific skill set in the long run. And when I was at BCG, I basically, my strategy was like come back to San Diego. And um, the reason I went to the Dallas office at BCG, not because I wanted to live in Dallas or knew anything about Dallas, but it was cheap. It was like low cost of living, and I could try and save up money and come back. And so that's what I did. And the BCG model, there's not a lot of biotech or pharma work in the southern system. There's different like regional systems at BCG. And so I worked mostly in the tech industry when I was there, but had an opportunity to come back to San Diego, work for Illumina for just under 2 years. It's an awesome company. They focus on genomics. And more recently started a podcast in the meantime, because like I realized during this process that like there's just not a lot of career information out there for many PhDs, and I wanted to provide a resource for people to learn about the various options or the various things that scientists do after careers. And so that was kind of the idea of the podcast. If you want to check it out, there's some really fun interviews, I think, and there's a good podcast following too. And I'm not saying that to be. I really doesn't matter to me if people listen to it, but I think that the people on there have really great experience. And then since then, started up a new position at Resilience, and so before kind of like opening up some broader questions maybe to what a career in consulting is, let me just give a quick plug for Resilience, because my role is head of scientific culture. It's an exciting company. It's an exciting startup, and if any of you are interested, and we're looking always for like the best and the brightest, and really scientists and engineers, for the most part, that have experience in things like gene therapy, genomics, vaccines. What we're doing is we have like an unparalleled team of founders and board of directors with like government officials, like former senators and FDA commissioner. So it's an exciting company. We were funded at 800 million recently. And what we're focusing on is like the next generation of biotech manufacturing. So like complex medicines, things like, things like vaccines. And we're really bringing like a technology forward process to it. So I'll just put in that plug. If you are interested, like I said, we're looking probably more for people on the science and engineering side in San Diego and Boston. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to careers@resilience.com, and or if you know anybody that you think would be an excellent candidate and is going on the job market. So that's all a quick introduction of myself, maybe not so quick, but I'll draw out some lessons I learned throughout this whole process. But let me just pause there. Is there anyone that has questions?
Everyone, you can type in your questions in the chat box if you have, or you can unmute yourself as well. Meanwhile, I'll arrange the questions. Some of the questions that I have for Nick. Nick, I think you can go ahead. So far, we don't have any questions.
Okay, sounds good. Feel free to jump in if you do. All right, so some of the things that I learned through this process. Number one is start early. Like, don't do what I did. Uh, don't figure it out like a month or two before, if possible. Some of you are in the position where it is already a little late, and you just have, like, you just got to figure out a way to double down and prioritize and do it quickly. In other instances, um, I think the slow and steady and approach is the best, because you can build up a network. You can really figure out what it is, because one of the challenges that for me was that I really didn't even know what consulting was when I did it, when I started it. I had an idea, and I figured it out along the way, but it would have been great to have more background, because if I could have tailored it a little earlier, I may have just gone straight to the startup community right away. So the second thing is get diverse experiences and talk to different people. Don't just focus on one thing. That's my advice. Find out what all the options are. Volunteer for something, and this is a challenging thing to say. Like, not everybody has the availability or opportunity to volunteer. I didn't have any kind of financial safety net. And I was still working full-time in the lab when I was interviewing, and was very, very busy. But if you can just find something that sounds interesting to you and volunteer for it, it could be the consulting club, and doing cases. It could be, I don't know, doing some sort of local nonprofit, or like just setting up some kind of like outreach program, or just talking to high school students. If you get started on anything, what starts to happen is that you figure out what are the things that really interest you. And let's say you're doing science outreach to a high school in Baltimore, and you just do that by starting to talk to some high school students, or maybe going to a local high school and being like, hey, I can give a quick talk about science. It's as simple as something like that. And what happens is that you get out of your comfort zone a little bit, and it's a little scary, but then you start to realize, whoa, like, I liked this piece of it. Like, I really liked talking about the science. I really liked seeing a change in people's perceptions, and I care about the policy, and so maybe that will lead you to go into science policy. Or I liked the organization of this, and maybe that will lead you to go into some sort of like business endeavor. It could be anything, but the more experiences you get, the more opportunities you have to make those pivots and figure out what is like exciting for you. Get to know people along the way, because the more you can help others, and also like just provide value to other people, and the more they're going to be willing to help you. I like firmly believe in the idea of karma. And so it's not like we call it networking, but really it's just getting to know people, making friends, making acquaintances, and as much as you can, like, help others. And that will in turn come back and it will benefit you in a lot of ways. And you don't do it so that you can get the benefits, but it is helpful. The fourth thing is know where you're going before you start going somewhere. This is so critical, because what I see a lot of times with many people in academia is that a lot of people have had really bad experience in a lot of instances. Not everyone, but it's challenging, and sometimes there's not a lot of mentorship, and people run away from an academic background sometimes. And I think that is not the best way to approach it. You don't want to be running away from something. You want to be running towards something. And what that means is that you have a destination in mind and something that you're excited about. Because if you're running away, you're doing it out of fear. And like, if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get anywhere. Or you're just going to get somewhere that is like not where you wanted to go. And so like really think deeply and introspectively about what you care about deep down, and make sure that that maps on to whatever you're doing in the future. And maybe that's research, maybe that's staying in academia, or maybe it's consulting, or maybe it's something else. Anything is okay as long as it's what you value. And then make a plan to get there. And just like solidly do the small things that it takes to get there, but keep doing it, keep consistent at it. And all those little things build up to something huge. And that's how you kind of shape a career from my perspective. So let me pause there. Are there any questions?
One question that I'd like to bring in at this point in time is, so it's from RLS. Well, I mean, it's not a name, but anyway. Wondering about the transition away from bench scientist. Do you feel like you were at a disadvantage without an MBA or a different background?
No. It's a great question. And it's something that I worried about when I started at BCG, because they're postgraduate, the people that go in from postgraduate careers into consulting, they're generally MBAs. They're people with a business background. The majority of them, I'd say like 70% or more. And then the rest are PhDs, MDs, lawyers, and you all come in at the same level. And one thing that I found is that, yeah, it might take a little bit longer for me to ramp up compared to an MBA. And this is a general consensus. I've talked to partners at BCG about this. The general consensus is that you're ramping up. Maybe an MBA has a more linear path and their asymptote, starts a little higher. But the PhDs is more kind of like sigmoidal. It's maybe a little flat, and it takes a little longer to figure out like what the hell you're doing. And then at some point, it's like this inflection, and you get this rapid growth period. And there's that kind of flat line, or the linear path of an MBA, but this kind of sigmoidal path for a PhD. Well, you get there around the same time, like to competence of like understanding how the job really works. It's a little bit longer, I think, for PhDs, like maybe 6 months for an MBA, whereas it's maybe 8 months to 9 months for a PhD. But there's also a higher, like, so I guess asymptote is kind of the right terminology there. There's a higher asymptote there, meaning that like many PhDs actually become better consultants in a lot of ways. And that's not all the time, of course, but you're smart, you have capabilities. And like, I would say that a career in science, and I don't know if this is true with engineering, but at least for me, a career in science broke me down in a lot of ways, and like made me doubt myself, made me doubt my confidence and my intelligence, because I was always around people that were incredibly smart, and I was like facing the edge of the known universe, right? And that's kind of a scary situation. You feel like you're inadequate in a lot of ways, and but you're not. Like, what you realize is that when you start comparing that to people with different backgrounds, you have amazing advantages, and like you've learned a process that like helps you solve problems very well. And the scientific process is not really that different from how you think about a business problem. I could see a business degree being useful in some instances if you really want to learn about like finance and kind of dive deep on some of these things. Great, go do a business degree. And you want to think about like frameworks for how companies solve problems, go do a business degree. But you can figure all that stuff out along the way if you get good training.
So, I mean, on a similar note, I mean, the question is, as a PhD student or while you are in basic science, you get trained in something very specific, right? Let's say you sort of were an expert in patch clamp, right? But then in the consulting domain, you have to solve a variety of problems because different companies might have different issues, as far as I can understand. So, I mean, how do you develop confidence and also expertise in terms of like going into something very specific that the clients come up with and trying to solve there? And you know what I mean, right? So
Yeah,
how do you maneuver that landscape?
you figure it out along the way. Uh, Honestly, it's like uh, business problems are not that hard of problems in a lot of ways. I mean, like the amount of knowledge you need to get up to speed for most business problems is it's not a huge threshold. It's not like a body of knowledge in science. It takes years and years to really get competent in a science and to contribute. It doesn't take that as long in business, and so but you do have to practice and get good at ramping up really quickly and figuring out what you're doing so that you can start contributing. And so you figure out ways to like learn about an industry, like do a competitive analysis, figure out like what the financials look like, and like how to read an income statement. Like those are pretty they're it's new material for sure, but it's really not like the concepts are pretty basic. And at BCG, we did like a mini MBA program for 3 weeks where they had all the PhDs come in and all the JDs and MDs, and they taught us basic business principles, and it was actually really fun because I got to know some really cool people through that process. But if you're going into consulting, there's a very they have good training programs to allow you to understand and gain some of that like fundamental knowledge.
Did you teach yourself some of these concepts before getting into the interview process, or
Mm,
like,
no, I learned basic principles of how businesses work. I mean, I had some context before because I'd worked in businesses, um, but I learned a lot of the things that you would need in consulting. Well, I mean, like at least a basic introduction to business and consulting through the case interview process, and
yeah,
then and then it really cements it in like as you're on the job training.
awesome. Okay, we have another question from Peter. Hi Nick, thanks for sharing your journey. I'm curious about your jump from BCG to corporate strategy in Illumina, and what are some best practices to pivot towards the client side? If one is interested in biotech BD strategy and operations, question number one. Okay, it's a long one. So were there specific projects you specialized in while in BCG that made you stand out as a candidate when you made the pivot? And number two, I was curious on your thoughts on BCG versus life sciences focused consulting firms like LEK, et cetera, in terms of placement into biotech uh, or strategy.
Yeah, so those are good questions. The best practices for pivoting um, into corporate strategy or BD or something like that. Know what you want to get. Like if you're utilizing consulting as a pivot point, which many people do, and it's a good way to do it. If you can, try and figure out what you want to do, like later on down the road early so that you can shape your experiences to be relevant to that. So for example, if you want to do BD, it's helpful to have financial, like to learn some financial tools. And so like uh, DCF analyses, and I don't know, like there's, and also like to know how to do, there's certain types of casework at these consulting firms where they're doing due diligence. And that's like a quick analysis of the company, and you know, you're looking at their strategy, you're looking at their competition. Those are kind of like really helpful skill sets to get into something like business development, because that's what you're doing, and you're kind of doing it with the lens, through the lens of like the science as well. And so make sure that you have a good scientific understanding, and then make sure that you have a good understanding of how to do these analyses, and that will prepare you for what you want to do. But if it's project or product management, there's like product management is another really interesting one. It's almost like you're kind of running a business within a business in a way. And so just kind of know where you want to go and like what it takes to get there. And then as you go into consulting and whatnot, shape your experience to be to position you in the best possible way to do that, to get to where you want to be. Consulting is a really great opportunity to pivot, I will say, and to find, or to go into any number of different industries and types of functional roles within those industries, because it's you learn a really broad. You're working in very like small time chunks on a project across a number of different industries, and so you're like getting to see how things work across different industries. You're getting to learn different functions. You're learning how to communicate really well. You're learning how to do analyses from like a business perspective, and those things are applicable to any number of jobs. I know people that have gone into like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example. I know people that have gone into business development. I know people that have gone to venture capital. I know people that have started their own like consulting business. There's a couple of really interesting ones I don't know if I should talk about right now. But yeah, it's a good pivot point to go to any number of these different things. Just try and tailor your experience to get to the one that you want to get to.
Yeah. So what you just meant was to focus on transferable skill sets that you can basically take from one job to another.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in the interest of time, how long, how many slides do you have? Because there are other questions. Shall I ask those questions, or shall we keep
Yeah,
them?
I think we can focus on that. I mean, like, here, let's just get through a couple slides real quick, and then I'll focus on the
Yeah.
questions.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So consulting is an interesting career. You at the big firms, at least, a lot of times there's a decent amount of travel. Early on, you're focused more on kind of smaller things, to be honest with you, like the data analyses, slide building, preparing information for like partners to talk about with clients. As you go further and further along the career path, you know, as a PhD, you jump in here at the consultant level. Before that, you know, some people come in straight from undergrad. Then you go into the consultant level. This is for BCG. These are the terminology for BCG. It's not the same for McKinsey or Bain or other firms. But you go from consultant to project leader, where you're managing a small team of a few consultants and or associates. And then you go to the level of principal, where you're managing a bigger team and you're starting to like work really closely with like bigger name, you know. So the later you are along the career trajectory, the higher level positions within client organizations you'll be working with, if that makes sense. So partners may be working with the CEO of a company, or the chief strategy officer, or the chief commercial officer, or an executive vice president, for example. The principals will also start working with them and trying to sell work and develop relationships with those people to really build business. And they're managing, and then they're also doing some day-to-day management of project leaders and consultants. Partners are generally not really doing the management of people. They're doing the management of principals. And then the principals are, I think I just kind of talked about that, but basically the idea is that like the further you go along in this career trajectory, the more it involves client interaction, working with people, selling, and the high level like strategic communication. The earlier on, it's more about you're learning the ropes and just figuring out what the job entails. You're getting better analyses. You're preparing things for other people. You own specific parts of the project. Like you have to really perform, and you have to be good with like figuring out timelines and executing according to those timelines. That's an essential component. But that's kind of the way that I see the career path working out. There's if you're just jumping in and want to get started, these are the types of things. Feel free to take a screenshot or whatever if you guys want to. And it's really just about like understanding the role. So some of the things I just talked about, as much as you can, like do an internet research, talk to people. This is the most important thing of this whole thing, is talk to people that are currently consultants, or that are like 1 to 2 years past where you are right now. I'd say that's the target of people that you want to really be focusing on, because they're the ones that have the time, one, and that have recently experienced it, and so they're good resources. And you're essentially kind of testing a hypothesis, like that. The hypothesis being that like this is the right career path for me, and by talking to individuals, you're gathering data points along the way, and you're analyzing, and you're trying to falsify that hypothesis so that this should be the path that you're going down. If you can't falsify it, then great, like really push for it. But if it doesn't fit, then move to something else. And that's what the process of networking is about to me. You're gathering data and meeting interesting people and figuring out how you can help them, and then gaining experience. So that's kind of understanding the role. You're going to prepare your materials. You're going to do a resume and a cover letter. In the resumes, you need to quantify. And if you want to get more information, like I talk about basically each of these things within an episode of the podcast. And again, it's onceascientist.net. There's a consulting 101 link on there, and for each of those discussions, I talk about one of these points. And so there's one on like what is it? There's another one on resume, and another one on cover letter. Resume and cover letter, and then another one on two on case interviews, where I'm actually interviewed in the case interview, and it was like a long time since I did it before that, so it's not great performance. But and then there's like getting ready for fit interviews, which is the general like interview questions. Tell me about yourself, or like what's something challenging that you went through. So in preparing your resume and cover letter, you're going to quantify as much as possible, like really give them evidence that you've accomplished things that are important, that you're a leader, that you can communicate well, and I talk about those things in more depth in the podcast, and so check that out if you want to. Building a cover letter is about telling a story. So resume is like a one-page highlight of like the impact that you've had on organizations and on people. That's what it is. Like, it's not like the things that you did. It's about how you impacted organizations. Like, I increased revenue by 20% by doing this, for example. Or, if it's like I how can I show impact with this? Like, I set up a training. I set up a training program within the lab, and this is like, not the best wording, but I set up a training program within the lab that impacted 14 students by building out a 3-day training with 5 modules or something like that. And that shows that you've organized things, that you've that you can communicate with other people, that you can lead on things. And those are the points you're trying to show in your resume. In the cover letter, you're telling a story. Like, here's where I am right now. Here's my background. Here's why I want to come and work for you in this location. And here are the things that I bring to the table. And you're actually literally telling a story about, like, I can persevere, or like I have perseverance, and then you tell like a quick story about persevering through something. But basically, you're trying to tie it back to the things that they care about. What are they looking for in a consultant? What types of cultural values does this company care about? And can you show that you have what it takes, and that you fit within their culture? Culture is really important in a business, and you always want to show, you always want to try and figure out what the culture is of the business, and then first of all, make sure that that fits with the way that you view the world, and then second of all, be able to show that that is the way that you view the world, and that you have kind of focused on those things before. Case interviews, these are like quick questions. The case interviews are essentially a model of what you would do as a consultant. So in an 8-week project, you'll have a number of you'll have a problem that you have to solve for a business. And that problem may involve a bunch of different components. You're going to be responsible for a certain part of it, at least. And then can you basically lay out an approach to do that, execute on it, and then provide a recommendation back to a client? And that's what you're doing in a case interview. It's just they're simulating it in like 30 minutes. So you'll actually lay out a framework for how you would solve this problem. If it's about helping this company get back to profitability, well, first I'm going to look at profit is broken down by revenue and costs, and so first I would want to look at the revenue. So what are our sources of income? Essentially you're laying out how you're going to solve the problem first, showing it to them, and then kind of simulating the process of what you would do in a case, which is gather data, test hypotheses, and drive toward a solution and or recommendation. And then at the end of that 30-minute, 40-minute interview, you're going to provide a very solid recommendation for what the company should do. So it takes a lot of practice, and I would say you want to do it with people in the consulting club where you are, like people that are kind of peers in your applicant pool, but also as much as you can, like some former and current consultants. I would say it takes about 50 cases or more on average to really get good at these for most people. But for some people, they're just like, smarter than me and can do it in 5 or 10 or something. I wouldn't count on that though, because there's a lot of smart people that go into this process. So, and I'm not going to downplay it. It's competitive. It's challenging to get in. And then you're going to practice fit interviews, like actually telling a story about yourself to other people. So they're going to ask you questions about, like, tell me about a difficult situation that you had. The way that I usually recommend this is, to me, best practice is I'm going to basically the way that I approached this was I got a list of a couple dozen questions online that people might ask in these types of interviews, and then I categorized them and kind of built a model for like the themes of questions that people might ask. And then I would distill it down to like 4 or 5 themes. And they could be like teamwork, like a time when I participated in as part of a team. Another thing is like leadership. Um, and maybe it's another one is like a difficulty. But you essentially distill it down into a few themes. Like maybe you'll have 30 questions that people could ask you in interviews, and then you categorize them into these themes, and then prepare a really good story for each of those themes. And it only takes 4 or 5 stories. And you should show that like you have made an impact, how you've done it, and you're honestly like literally telling a story like a movie or a book. Like you're building up the context, you're sharing the context behind what it was, you're stating the problem that you had to solve, and then you're going to talk about all the um, you're going to build it up to like a climactic moment where you know I'll give you an example of like what I just told you about how I went through this PhD process and I failed for 3 years. That was kind of building that up to the climax. And then what happened is like I decided I was going to the action that I took was I decided I was going to push and finish this PhD. And so essentially that's the art of storytelling, and it's so important. Like so much more important, not just in science, or I mean, not just in business, but in science. This is like an essential life skill. The better you can get at telling stories, the I promise you this, the more you will succeed in at what you want to do. Um, and so it takes practice. And but it's also a skill. It's not something that like I have been good at. It's something that I've really had to focus and work on. So that's the process of getting into consulting. This is kind of the general timeline I would recommend. It's not the one that I followed myself, of course, but yeah, there's my presentation. Open for questions.
Okay. Do you want me to go to the questions?
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
So,
Omkar has asked, how did your day-to-day change over time from BCG to Illumina to Resilience?
okay, so it was really hectic and crazy at BCG. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. Sometimes I was like, early on, I really wanted to get good at it, good at the job within the first week, and so I mean, sorry, not the first week, the first few months. And so I spent like I would work from 8 a.m. till 11 p.m. sometimes, and that was me, but I think a lot of people do that. And I don't think it's super healthy. It's not what everyone wants to do, but it's just kind of sometimes doing what you have to figure out how to get good at something. So it was really intense. That intensity, by the time I had finished at BCG, I had learned a lot of those things and had like developed a skill set that I could utilize. And I utilized that skill set at Illumina, and it was just clearly just not as crazy or busy. And so I had time to start a podcast because I wanted to. And so the work-life balance was much more sustainable at Illumina. And then at the startup, uh, it's interesting. Working at a startup is like you kind of get to you get to make a lot of decisions about how you're gonna work, and I can like do this in the middle of the day if I want to because no one is like really telling me what to do on a day-to-day basis. Like I'm creating my own job essentially as I go along, and that's that's a bit different. it does end up being kind of intense a lot of times because you've got like deliverables, like you're under a lot of pressure, you know, like the company has to like continue to raise money in some cases. In this instance, in the company I'm working for, I think, you know, we're pretty well capitalized. We don't have to worry that as much about that. But like that also means that we have to grow really quickly. And so there's a level of intensity that is, you know, can be stressful, but I think it's honestly personally exciting at the same time.
So one question that I have is like a lot of my friends and sometimes I as well, we suffer through some of the issues. I mean, you could be passionate about what you do on the bench, let's say, or in the lab, but then it is not well paid. Some of us want to get paid more. So there is this issue of money, but you may, I mean, since we haven't seen much of, like I personally haven't seen much of company or consulting side, I don't know whether I like that job or not. So there is this balance between money, passion, I would say boredom, and you mentioned work-life balance as well. So, I mean, there's this uncertainty. Let's say if you want to join a startup instead of a consulting, right? So how
Mhm.
did you navigate that space? You know, you must have asked this question to yourself again and again.
I did, and part of it was like part of the way I navigated it was by going into consulting, because I knew that I needed to like at least make a certain amount of money, and like I didn't have a safety net uh, at all. I don't come from like my family. I grew up very poor, and, and so it was really scary. And uh, part of the reason why I went into consulting because I knew like that would get me to a certain like I would be able to make a living, and as long as I was making something, you know, similar to that, or like it was fine. I don't need to be rich. I don't want to be rich. I'm working on my freaking garage. Um, I got it, and I'm totally happy. So um, I think that there is a reality of like interest uh, versus being able to sustain and build a life that is what you want outside of what you're doing. And and I will be 100% honest with you and say that yes, I made some trade-off and like I did some things, I'm doing some things that personally are probably not right now. Right now what I'm doing, I love what I'm doing. Like, but when I was at BCG, I wasn't that excited about some of the problems I was working on. Um, and it didn't have that uh, deep like passion for finding an IT vendor for a government agency. like,
Right.
um, but the problems were still like the process that you take is still really interesting. And like you're learn like everything that I've done after I've left science is has always been very interesting. Um, and so like you learn new skill sets, it makes up for it in a lot of other ways. But the way that I navigated it was like I went into consulting so I could kind of get that base level, and then and that's when I jumped off to work for a startup. So but I could see it any number of different ways. You can go directly and work for a startup if you want to kind of utilize your scientific skills, or you can go into other things. But and you can always, you know, stay in science. It's just figuring out like what are the trade-offs that you care about, and then
Yeah,
I don't know.
totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Getting into consulting can be a very competitive process. How did you have fallback careers planned? Question mark. Can you name some other career paths that people interested in consulting should explore as additional options?
Um, yeah.
Like backups, simple as that.
Yeah. Let me actually just hang on. I'm gonna stop sharing here. Um, yeah. Business development's really interesting. Um, uh, Product management is another really interesting opportunity or option. Venture capital is really interesting. Those ones have, and there's others. Those are the big ones, like from a business perspective, from in my mind. There's also other things that are, uh, I don't know, just different. Like there's like public policy that is really interesting. You know, working for nonprofits. Uh, what I would do is, I mean, you can go like if you want to get a sense, you can look at the podcast and just see like what are the categories and different things that people have done on that, and you know, kind of get a lay of the land. But I would say that the ones that are kind of more similar to consulting are probably going to be business development, product management, uh, like I was saying, venture capital, investment banking. If you have like a really quantitative background, um, that is like even more intense than consulting, and I personally think less interesting. But like they, if you really want to make a lot of money like early and quick, then that might be a good option.
Okay. Another question from Ranjani. How much can you negotiate? What kinds of project you get involved in a big company like BCG?
You don't get to negotiate very much at all at first. You're assigned projects, and you're showing that you can execute on those things and get good at and um, be able to function in uh, a high pressure environment. And then as you get more and more experience, you're able to leverage that to say, you know, like you're essentially always on the job market as a consultant, because um, you work on a project for a short period of time, and then once that project finishes, you have to figure out what's the next project you're going to be on, and you're networking within the company, and it's almost like you're on the interview process like over and over and over. It's like this microcosm of like constantly applying for jobs. Um, and so you get more and more leverage to be able to choose what you're doing later as you show that you have executed and early on. And that's why it's good to focus very early on getting good at the job.
Okay, one question that I skipped was how were you able to leave consulting to go back to research, like research as
Hmm.
in
So
quotes?
I'm not working in research myself. I'm not doing the actual research. My job is head of scientific culture. And I'm basically building out like a cultural model within the company that people are where they're excited to work here. And we're building out like a good remote working environment, for example. And uh, yeah, so those are kind of examples of how we of things that I'm doing. I have to understand the science, um, at least to a certain level, um, and I get to talk about the science because I go to, you know, meetings where we're like figuring out the strategy behind some of our platforms that we're building, and uh, and so I really like that aspect. I didn't have as much of that when I was at Illumina. And not because it was just because of the role I was in at Illumina, which was more commercial, like focused on the sales team.
All right, we have one more question from Elena. If you know you want to use consulting as a launchpad to do something else, like corporate strategy, how do you talk about that in a consulting interview?
You don't. I mean, you can be a little bit honest. I was, and like they asked me. I remember one time they asked me, so like, why do you want to do consulting, and like, what do you want to do in 5 years? And and I said, that's a really good question. And I'll give you the answer that I might have said, and maybe I think this is close to what I said. Um, yeah, that's a great question. You know, first of all, I'm excited about consulting, and uh, I want to you know continue down this path, and I think you know, assuming that I'm performing well and you know, continue to be excited about the job or continue to be excited, I want to continue as a consultant, or I want to continue at Boston Consulting Group until the level of partner, because I think that, you know, for this reason and this reason and this reason. Um, I am also interested in the biotech startup community. I've had this experience and this experience, and so, you know, uh, all options are on the table, but at this point, I'm really excited about consulting.
Okay, fantastic. I think those were the questions that we have for now. And yeah, do you have more slides, Nick?
Nope, I'm
I think
good.
we are out of time.
Okay. What, sorry, what's that?
I'm saying, do you have more slides? I think we are just, I mean, out of time. So we
No,
can,
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks everyone for coming and yeah,
yes.
if you have any questions, I yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
thanks.
that was a great session. I think it was kind of interactive, so many questions and a lot of appreciation coming in from everyone for being honest, for being sharing your story. And I can't thank you enough for taking your time out and doing this for us. Um, yeah, please join me in thanking Nick. So thanks a lot, Nick.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
So one more thing for everyone is that next session is going to be on December 18th, and we will have another guest who is going to talk about life sciences consulting, and we'll have a case study as well. So please register for that. I'm going to send a link to everyone anyway. And we are going to, I mean, we are recording this session, and we'll put it up in an online repository for people who who are not present today and who will join the club later, so that this content is available for them to gain knowledge from. All right. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for taking your time out, and thanks a lot, Nick. And hope you have a great day.